Trans rights are under fire. We see it every day. And today we are digging deep and finding out what the hell is going on out there. I'm Patrick Marano, and this is Queerly Us. Joining me today is Stephanie Woolley, a queer trans woman, Vice President, Education and Advocacy Chair, and a support facilitator at Toronto PFLAG, a partner in the Trans Social Collective, and a member of the Trans Pride Committee of Pride Toronto, among many, many other things. Steph, welcome to Queerly Us.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm so glad to be here.
Oh my goodness. Well, you know, when you sent me your bio, it was so chock full of things that you have done and life that you've experienced that I want to get into that in the podcast rather than an introduction. I just don't want you to think that I left out anything important. Actually, if I did leave out anything important, why don't you tell us right now?
Actually, I don't think you did. You hit the major ones, and you know, I'm a retiree, so I have lots of time to give back, and I love to, and it's very rewarding. And I have the spoons where other people often don't. So I'm just here trying to make life a little bit better for us all.
Yeah, and you do for many, many people. You know, I'm curious, you know, let's start at the beginning, because I'm curious to know what life was like growing up as Steph.
Sure. It was a very different time. It was the 70s. And I was a teenager and a preteen, and I knew there was something about my gender identity from the time I was 12. You know, when you're the good son of a evangelical fundamentalist household, and you find yourself compelled to try on your mom's clothes,
Yeah.
you think something's going on. But you know, it was a time where there was no visibility of trans people. There was no good information. There was lots of misinformation.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as I said, I was the child of a very religious household, and everything the church would say was that, you know, this was evil, this was sinful, this was demonic. I was going straight to hell. So for many decades, I repressed it. Lots of internalized transphobia to get over, and lots of just misinformation, even by the 90s. And I worked in software development, so I had very early access to the internet.
Wow.
You know, and the first thing you do is go start looking up things on trans and cross-dressing. And I found, you know, a few of the good sites that were available that early, but even then my brain would not accept me as a trans woman. I could get as far as being a cross-dresser. And the whole idea of transitioning, you know, in those days, it wasn't explained as trans women were women and they transitioned to better align their bodies with who they really are. It came across largely as an extreme fetish, you know, that cross-dressers and transsexuals were not that different. And some of them went to the extreme lengths of changing their body. And that just seemed way too far out for me in those days. But I eventually came out. The start of my coming out was actually me almost having a stroke. So we called 911, and the EMTs came in. And the first thing they do, of course, is take your blood pressure. And I can still remember the EMT's eyes getting like so wide and just like, just sit there, be calm. We're gonna go get the gurney. It's like,
You think they knew?
Out. Oh yeah, because they looked at the reading, and I was like 230 over 160.
I don't know what that means.
I know,
but that sounds bad. Yeah. Okay.
That is
It's
extremely
bad.
high.
Yeah.
And basically, they told me on the way into emergency that I was very lucky that if those blood vessels in my nose didn't let go,
Yeah.
I would almost certainly have had a stroke.
So that saved you.
It did.
Okay.
It did.
And was it? It saved you in more than one way. It saved your life, literally, but also right?
It is, because when you have an experience like that, you suddenly realize that there are things in your life that you needed to explore and maybe fix.
Mm-hmm.
It's time to get on with it. So I started exploring online and found a local trans and cross-dresser group, and eventually, near the end of 2010, came out and went to their Christmas gala as myself. So that was my first time out. The
Yeah.
interesting thing is my brain still wouldn't accept that I was trans. I came out as a cross-dresser.
Okay.
And then in the next 6 months, as I got out more and more and hung out with the group more and more, I realized that all my close friends in the group were the other trans women, not the
Yeah.
cross-dressers. And I didn't feel like I had much in common with the cross-dressers.
So, for somebody who's listening, can you help us understand the difference between a cross-dresser and somebody who's trans then?
Yes, that's an important distinction.
Mm-hmm.
So a cross-dresser is typically a cis male. And for those who don't understand, cis is simply the inverse of trans. It's short for cisgender. So you have
Right.
transgender people and cisgender
Cis
people.
is you're born with the genitalia, and you connect with that. Like
We
you
yeah we
are
would
what?
we would
How do you
say
describe it?
we would say your gender identity matches your assigned sex at birth,
Thank you. Okay.
because that's the way we talk about it. Because
Yeah.
I was I've always been trans. I've always been a woman. It just took me a long, long time to accept it.
Sure.
But the doctor took a look between my legs when I was born and said
Yeah.
it's a boy.
You're a
It
boy.
turns out he was wrong.
Doctors
Um,
are wrong sometimes.
oh, they are. In this
Oh yeah.
case, they're wrong,
Yeah.
1 or 2% of the time
Yeah.
for trans and non-binary people.
Yeah.
So a cross-dresser is a cis male, because typically there are female cross-dressers, but they're much more rare.
Mm.
So typically a cis male who is attracted to feminine clothing and dress and presentation, but their gender identity is still male. They're comfortable being
Yes.
a male. It's just they have this other side of them.
Yes, and their sexual, it doesn't affect their sexual identity. They could be homosexual, they could be heterosexual,
Oh, absolutely.
right?
And one key thing that many people don't realize is that our sexual orientation and identity and our
Hmm.
gender identity are
Yeah,
completely separate
that is
entities.
so important to understand, and people can't seem to, you know, divide the two.
It
It's you're
it's
yeah,
it's true.
such an
That's one
important
of the
point.
first pieces of education
Hmm.
we do.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm pan, but my sexual orientation could be anything.
Hmm.
Um, but my gender identity is trans woman.
Right.
So as I said, in the first 6 months, I realized I was much more closely aligned with the trans women. And then one Saturday in April of 2011, I was going to a dinner with this group, and I stayed at a small B&B downtown to change, because I was not yet ready to
Sure.
walk out my own door as me. And I walked up through the village to the restaurant, and it was a beautiful spring day. And I just felt comfortable and relaxed. And, everyone was smiling and saying hello to everybody. And I realized it had nothing to do with the clothes. I mean, I was glad to be presenting as who I was, but it was just me being me. And that was,
Hmm.
the first real signal that yeah, I was trans. And around that time I started to say I was trans rather than a cross-dresser.
What a freeing moment for you.
It is. I did not,
I mean,
many trans people have, the eureka moment where they accept themselves.
mm,
Mine was slower and more gradual, and that's sort of the way my brain works. Um, but that was a big part of it. And then it went from there. And I had a long, slow, incremental journey towards deciding to transition and live authentically full time.
mhm.
It took me, by the end of 2015, I largely knew Then it took me a couple of years to get into a safe place to do it. And then, as is typical, unfortunately, it took me 6 months to find a doctor. And then I started HRT and went
Yeah.
full time.
What a
And
journey.
here we are. It was. That is kind of how my brain works, though. That I incrementally get there. I don't have, these bursts of knowledge and
The aha
awareness and
moment.
then
Oprah
start off.
Winfrey.
Yeah, I have a friend who didn't realize what trans people were till she was 39.
Yeah.
And, within days of accepting herself, it's like, I'm going to find a doctor and transition.
Wow.
And I was the opposite. I just had this long, slow journey. When I knew I was trans, I was like, it's going to be okay as long as I'm out there a bit. And it's like, oh, well, I'll transition fully when my mom passes and when I get divorced. And, I went through all those stages to the point where I knew, all of the things I was enjoying in life, all of the things that brought me joy and happiness were a Stephanie. So I was like, why am I not living authentically full time? The trans community talks a lot about our journeys towards authenticity. And we always say, whatever journey that works for you, however you want to do it and however long it takes, if it works for you, it's the right journey. There's
100%,
there's no right way to transition. There's no wrong way. There's no checklist and timeline. You do it the way that makes sense for you and allows you to get there in a whole fashion.
There's no wrong way of doing it.
Absolutely.
Right? So that brings us to, let's talk a little bit about PFLAG and your journey with them. First of all, tell us, for people that are listening, they might not know what the organization does, what they stand for, and your role within it.
Great. So Toronto PFLAG is basically a support and education organization, not just for members of the queer and trans community, but for their friends and families as well, especially parents. It was founded about 50 years ago in Toronto by two moms of gay kids who wanted to build more support for their gay kids, and later joined the worldwide family of PFLAG organizations. So PFLAG exists around the world. It was also founded in the early 70s, in the early days of the gay liberation movement in New York City, again by two moms of gay
moms.
men.
Yeah.
Moms.
Those moms.
PFLAG moms are a thing. Yeah.
You don't fuck with the moms. They
Nope.
will.
Here's mama bears. All loving and kind when they, usually, but when they need to be, you don't want to get in their way.
Don't come after their kids.
Yep. That's great. So we joined the worldwide organization, and as I said, primarily a support and education organization. We run support meetings. We run 3 support meetings a month for everyone, but primarily focused on families. So we get a lot of parents whose kids have just come out and they're scared and they don't know how to support them. So we help reassure them and help set them on the right path and help them accept and love their kids, because that's the first thing you want. When your kid comes out to you, the first thing you want to do is say, I accept you and I love you just as you are.
Those words.
Because that's what kids are worried about.
Yeah.
Right? How vulnerable is it to come out as a kid to your parents? You depend on them for everything. And I'm sad to say that even in a progressive city like Toronto, there are still kids who are kicked out the same day they come out and end up on the streets. We get calls from kids who are, trying to find some place to stay after their parents kick them out.
Yeah. How can you kick out your child?
I know. It's still your child.
It's your child.
If you love them the day before, you should love them now.
What changed? Yeah.
The fact that their sexual orientation or their gender identity is different, they're still your child.
Yep.
So we run the support meetings. We're running them over Zoom, so anyone can attend. And obviously, we primarily get people from the GTA, but we get people from all over Canada and from the northern US as well. So,
Well, that's yeah, because I was thinking, yeah, Toronto, like you said, it's not perfect, obviously, but it's a bit of a bubble. Also, I think we live in a
Mhm.
bit of a cozy bubble here. But yeah, in the rural parts of Ontario and the country, those kids need supports too. So it's nice that what an important thing that you guys are doing.
It is. It's very rewarding. So
I
we have the
mean,
three family meetings. We also have a special meeting for dads because what we found out was
mm,
when couples came to the family meetings, most of the dads would let the moms do the talking,
hmm
and they didn't engage too much. So
yeah.
one of our PFLAG dads had this brilliant idea to start up a dads meeting,
Oh,
and they started up just before the pandemic, and they
that's
did it
great.
at a bar in the village. And the
Yeah,
dads got together for beer and wings, but
yeah.
also to talk about their kids.
hmm I
Um,
love that.
and in that environment, they were much more open and, made much more progress.
Yeah.
And then last year, I had the honor, along with two of my friends, of founding PFLAG Toronto's first trans-specific support group, a group for trans women and non-binary people. And we
Oh,
thought there
okay.
was a need there because
Yeah.
the only previous support group in Toronto closed down at the start of the pandemic
Oh,
when the facilitator moved away.
okay.
Um, so we started up, and demand has been great. We've had great attendance, and I think we've helped a lot of people.
Oh my gosh,
So
I bet.
that's been
So,
so rewarding.
is it for parents with kids who are trans?
No, this is for trans and non-binary adults.
Okay. Oh, okay, okay. Like a support group for them. So,
Yep.
so it's a little bit of an offshoot of the original mission of PFLAG.
Well, PFLAG has been broadening. Certainly since I've been involved, we've always had a steady stream of queer and trans adults come to the family meetings.
Okay.
And we call them family meetings, but they're open to all. But there
Yeah.
was enough of a gap in the community, specifically around trans women and non-binary folk, that we wanted to do a separate meeting. And you're seeing that more and more in various PFLAG chapters, that they're doing more support of community members as well as the families. The reason why we didn't include trans men and trans masculine people is there is a very good group in Toronto, and we didn't
Oh,
want to compete.
yeah.
So
Well, and I mean, things change. Also, when an organization is birthed, I guess it's birthed out of necessity. There's a reason for it, the necessity. But as time progresses, I guess needs change, right?
they do, and we've seen that change in PFLAG.
Mm,
I didn't regularly start going to PFLAG till about 5 years ago, but I went a few times back in 2012 or 13.
hmm
And in those days, I was a rarity, and parents of trans kids were a rarity. It was mostly parents
Wow.
of gay and lesbian and bi kids.
Mm,
When I started to go 5 years ago, it was, a small majority of parents of trans kids, but there were still quite a few parents of gays and lesbians. Today, 2023, it's like 90% parents of trans kids among the
yeah,
families that are
yeah.
coming.
Maybe there's
Oh,
been a shift. Maybe it's a son comes out as gay. The parents are like, "Yeah, of course you are." Like,
yeah,
what?
there,
Who
there,
cares?
there is there
you
is
know?
more acceptance. It's actually funny when we do get a parent of a gay or lesbian kids, they're almost apologetic. I'm sorry, we need support. And it's like, no,
Yeah. Oh, we're
it's still
behind the
it's it's
times.
still it's still a hard and people need support.
hmm
I don't want to give anyone the idea that they're not welcome. They
No, of
are, and we
course.
will
Yeah.
will support them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think often parents are more comfortable these days than accepting their gay and lesbian kids, where more struggle with their trans kids.
Mm.
And you know, having a trans child who may transition, may do a medical transition, may do a legal transition, there's more for the parents to do. You have to help your child navigate the healthcare system,
Right.
help them change their name and
Right.
their legal ID.
Yeah.
There's lots more work, lots more advocacy. I mean, even with gay kids, there's lots of advocacy, say, around the schools.
Sure.
And you have to be able to help your kid and make sure your kid is getting treated properly in in schools, whether they're gay or trans. But with the special elements that come with being trans and actually um, changing your life and changing who you are physically and how you present to the world.
Yeah.
Right. If a gay kid wants to, they can still be mostly under the covers
Yeah.
today. But
Sure.
if you're trans and suddenly you're showing up as another gender, that's not something you can hide.
Surprise. Well, and also, like you're saying, if it's the children, then they need the parents to be there to support them. But even greater than that, they also need the supports available to them, because which is a good leeway into, all the threats to trans rights and the gender affirming care that we're seeing around the world. Can you talk to us a little bit about the hate that's happening?
Sure. And it's interesting, over the now, and this is amazing, 12 years I've been out. Um, for most of that, we saw growing acceptance and, good visibility, some great trans role models in entertainment and even in politics and in many fields. We have leaders in many fields. One of my friends is a supervising engineer with NASA on Artemis.
Come on.
Nope. And in fact, she's not the only trans person working.
Like actually a rocket scientist?
She is, yes.
That's amazing.
Um, so that's great. But over the last few years, we have seen a lot of transphobia and hate rising, especially in the US and the UK. In the UK, led by a few prominent people in the arts, who say,
Can we say her name?
sure, J.K. Rowling.
Thank you. Can I
It's
say I never liked those Harry Potter books, by the way? I'm just going to say it now.
there
Never liked it.
there are better books on very similar themes
Yes.
around childhood wizardry
hmm
and magic.
That's right.
There are better stories
Yeah.
than that. So that's happening there, and then it's being picked up by the Tory government in Britain now, which is busy removing rights. In the US, it's even worse, especially in the South and especially in Republican states. This year alone, so just since the start of 2023, there are over 450 anti-trans bills progressing in 37 states.
That's mind-boggling.
It it is. They're banning gender affirming care for minors. They're removing insurance coverage for gender affirming care for adults,
Yeah.
which of course means most people can't afford
Of course.
the transition. They're banning participation in sports. Um, they're making it a felony to be in a bathroom with a minor
Right.
in some states. So, you're sitting there washing your hands and a child walks in, suddenly you've you performed a criminal act.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the bills are often ridiculous. They're clearly unconstitutional. And, they'll all be challenged in court, but, we worry with conservative courts, Republican dominated courts in the US that they'll find some way of supporting them. So there's a lot of fight going on, but there's a lot of hate. At the CPAC conference, if you're familiar with that, which is a really big conservative conference, political conference in the US a few weeks ago, Michael Knowles called for the eradication of transgenderism.
Oh.
And I want to say that very clearly.
Yeah.
He has threatened to sue anyone who says he called for eradication of transgender people.
Yeah.
He called for eradication of transgenderism. But there's no such thing as transgenderism. There's just transgender people.
Okay.
So it's the same thing.
We're just talking about genocide now.
We are. And in fact, organizations that study genocide have called out the situation in the US as an emerging genocide. So it's very serious. And this is all being driven by organized religious right-wing groups who are working with the Republicans. There's been evidence uncovered that these groups are working closely with Republican state legislatures on these bills. And if you look at the bill's text, they're all very similar. They're clearly copying and being led by groups into how to position these bills correctly. And related to it is all the bans coming on drag performers.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is really another way of getting at trans people. Drag and trans are two different things.
Yes.
But there's a relationship because some of the drag bans are written so generally that trans people could be included.
Okay.
Right. It's just like any male body person wearing female clothing is part of the ban. So that could be a drag performer, or
probably if you're
trans woman.
Yeah, I'm assuming ignorant people don't know the difference between a drag queen and a trans person anyway. They just see somebody who maybe looks different than the gender that they think they should look like, and it's just a clear across the board.
Yep, it is. That is an ongoing problem, even within the queer community.
Yeah,
sometimes.
Sure.
So things in the States are horrible. Families and trans people are planning to flee. Of course, that's expensive.
Mm-hmm.
There are safer states. There are several states that have passed trans refuge bills where they will not honor warrants from these anti-trans bills, and they have better provision of gender-affirming care. But it's hard.
Imagine having to flee your home.
Indeed, and this is the 21st century and supposedly a liberal democracy.
The best country in the world.
It is, and there's a petition working its way to Parliament in Canada that Canada should accept trans refugees from the US. Okay. That's hard because they're our closest ally, and to say to them,
sure,
we don't think this marginalized community is safe in you, has lots
of
it has lots of diplomatic and political aspects to it. But
tread lightly,
right? That petition has gotten over 140,000 signatures. So people are seeing it. In Texas, they have made provision of gender affirming care to minors child abuse.
Right.
So they can seize the children
from the family,
the trans kids from the family.
Right.
So that's horrific. And Florida is in the middle of doing the same thing. So it's completely unsafe to live there.
Yeah.
So many families can't flee. It's hard if you're a working class family and you don't have much money. How do you pull up stakes and move thousands of miles to a safe state?
Yeah.
You got to find a job, you got to find some place to live.
And when these ideas are coming from the top, from the government, and they're saying, these are bad, these are it trickles down, and it gives them the power to say,
it normalizes those thoughts.
As if it's not hard enough to begin with,
and Trump started a lot of this, and Trump, it looks like Trump may not be around to run in 2024.
Woo!
But
go to jail. Lock him up. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, we're pretty happy about that. But he's made campaign promises already about what he'll do about trans rights if he was reelected in 2024.
Yeah.
And of course, Governor DeSantis in Florida is one of the leaders, if I could use that term, in promoting anti-trans bills. And he is likely going to be one of the favored candidates for the Republicans in 2024. So that's very scary.
Yeah.
We are seeing hate rising in Canada, not to anywhere near the same level as in the US.
Yeah.
And it's a better situation in Canada in general. It is the country in general is a little more progressive and accepting. The religious right is not the force in Canada that it is in the US.
Thank God.
Especially outside of Alberta. And we're very thankful that trans rights are included in both the federal Charter of Rights and Freedoms and in the Ontario Human Rights Code. So both gender identity and gender expression are included as protected classes. So it's illegal to discriminate against people
Okay.
on both of
And
those.
and that's like enshrined in there?
Yes, yep.
Okay, good.
It went into the Ontario Human Rights Code in
Wow.
2012.
That's amazing.
And it went into the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in 2017 with Bill C-16.
Okay.
And I had the honor to be in the visitors gallery when it passed the Senate, which was the final step. Yeah,
Wow.
that was a beautiful moment. You know, if you're in a gallery in Parliament, you know, you're not supposed to say anything. You can't clap.
Okay.
You know, you have to sit very quietly, but of course
Yeah.
we all jumped up and screamed and started
Yeah.
hugging each other.
Yeah.
And the beautiful thing was Jody Wilson-Raybould, who was the Minister of Justice, and therefore was her bill, came and sat in the public gallery with us. And, you know, the guards started moving in on us, and she just waved at them and said, no, this is good.
To stop you from cheering?
No, she stopped the guards from
stopping you?
From stopping us, yeah. Oh, and she hugged everybody too. And
Yeah,
there was lots
of course.
Tears.
Yeah, it's
and then
time to celebrate.
You know, everybody in the Senate, or at least everybody who voted for us, you know, turned around and gave us applause.
Yeah.
So it was a lovely moment.
I'm so thankful to live in this country for so many reasons, but I do get nervous when I see things happening so badly, unraveling south of the border, because there is a bit of a ripple effect, I guess.
It is, and more than even a ripple effect. There's certainly a ripple effect, but we see right-wing groups in Canada copying the successful tactics of the U.S. Like one of the tactics down there has to run transphobic and queerphobic parents for school boards. And there was an organized campaign in the municipal elections in the fall to run what they called anti-woke candidates all for school boards.
Right.
Thankfully, that largely failed quite badly, but there were a few candidates elected.
Mm-hmm.
And they have caused disruptions lately at Ottawa Carleton school board meetings and at Durham District school board meetings. The good news, and this is the difference with Canada, is in both those cases, especially in Durham, the people who came to disrupt and to protest trans inclusion in schools were met by a much larger protest of community members and supportive families and allies.
Yeah.
So it was quite beautiful, and they didn't get a chance to do much because, you know, they had a few people and they were surrounded by dozens of community members, and they were singing and dancing, and it was just really, really.
So they were outnumbered, right?
They were outnumbered, but we need to make sure that's always going to be true. And we need to call out what's happening and the increases in hate we see. You know, as well as things like school board meetings, we're seeing it on parent council. So we're urging accepting and supportive parents to get on their parents' councils and make sure they're solid. We're seeing it in media, even in mainstream media. Now, I'm not talking about, you know, rebel media and things like that. I'm talking about the Post and the Globe and Mail and the Star and the CBC and CTV. All of them have run transphobic articles or op-eds in the last year. And often what media that's seen as more progressive does is they'll run them as op-eds. And this is something we always have to struggle against, you know, the both sides-ism, the what-about-ism.
Right. There's good people on both sides, right?
Yes, let's have a debate about trans rights. Well, my existence is not up for debate.
Yeah, it's not a debate. There's nothing to debate about.
So that's how places like the Star manage to get transphobic material in. So we need people to push back against that and complain.
Well, you bring up an interesting point of like you hear, oh, it's freedom of speech. So I wonder, when does freedom of speech, like when can you stop that? When is it hate speech? And when
Exactly.
it's very
And
gray.
I had a discussion with Marcy Lynn, the Minister for Women and Gender Equality, at an event a few weeks ago, and the community is beginning to call strongly for the federal government to get more in the game.
Mm,
It's not that we need more laws necessarily. We do
yeah.
have the protections, but they need to be enforced. And I would love to see both the federal and provincial governments, start running campaigns to talk about, trans people are just ordinary people. We just want to live our lives
Hmm.
in
Well,
peace
not
and have a
really.
happy
They
life.
sound like they're rocket scientists, according to you.
We're rocket
It's not
scientists.
regular people. I mean,
We're rocket scientists, we're
yeah,
doctors. I know so many I know so many scientists, I know great attorneys,
yeah,
but in the end, we're ordinary people. We
of course.
want to find love and live a happy life and enjoy our families. And that's all we want. And people talk about, all the nasty trans activists. We're activists because we're under attack. If
Yeah.
people left us alone to get on with our lives,
Yeah, we don't
there'd
want
be
to
a
be
whole lot less.
activists. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was similar to gay rights. I mean, there's
Yeah.
so many similarities between what's happening now to trans people
Yeah.
and what happened to gay and queer people in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
Like even the arguments are similar, that we're grooming kids,
Yeah.
we're all
Right. Right.
pedophiles. All those arguments you
Pedophiles. Right.
probably heard
Yeah.
back in the
Yeah.
day.
Well, then we can see that. I mean, it's turned out in our favor. So we know where this is going. So I mean, everyone just shut up.
Yeah,
Stop pushing against it.
the arc of history is upwards, but
Right.
no one said it was linear,
Right.
and we're going to go through
Right.
some bad
That's true.
times. So we're trying to push past the bad
Yeah.
times without having too much damage to
Right.
vulnerable
Right.
people
Right.
who are out there.
Well, like you said, with the judges in the states and the Supreme Court, if they enshrine, if they get those in the books and stuff like that, it's going to just take longer to unravel and undo all of that. So it's like get in now and
Yep, and people and lots of people will get hurt.
mhm,
I mean, I know queer trans couples in the US. I know two of them
mhm,
that were planning, big celebratory weddings, but they changed their plan and did quiet, quick weddings because they wanted to get legal before someone took
mm,
same-sex marriage away. And I'm sure it's the same in the gay
yeah,
community.
yeah,
Um, so so there's a lot of terrible things, and we really want to prevent things from coming up here. You know, we don't have the Republican Party, but certainly fringe right-wing parties have embraced anti-trans
yeah,
things, and I will say the conservatives have dallied with it as they're dallying with so many
mm,
right, extreme right-wing things
mhm,
today. Um, so we want to push that back. We need
of
people to
course.
go out and talk to their legislators and to candidates in elections and say, no, I don't want any of that. That's not me. That's not right.
Well, that's a
And
good
push
point.
back.
How can people that are listening that are on board, how can they show their allyship? How can they support the community?
Absolutely. There are so many ways, and this is one of the things we talk about in our workshops. First of all, just show that you're an ally and you're a safe person. You
Hmm.
know, maybe it feels a little performative, but wear a pride flag or a trans flag pin,
Mm,
especially in offices and schools.
yeah.
It's important for people to wear things and have things in their
Mm,
office that indicate. And then, you know, both in terms of queerphobia, homophobia, and transphobia, they're
mm,
one of the few subjects you can make terrible jokes about today,
right.
where you can't, the culture has changed and it's not acceptable to make racial jokes in
Right.
most places anymore, or even sexist jokes.
Hmm.
But you can still make a anti-gay joke or an anti-trans joke. So
Hmm.
we need our allies to stand up and say, no, that's not acceptable. You can't do that in front of me. If we if a community member is there, look to see whether we want to stand up first and then support us.
Hmm.
But sometimes we don't feel safe, and then maybe we need our allies to take the
Mm.
lead. So that's one thing. Um, in workplaces, push for more trans inclusion. If you're a manager or a leader or even a thought leader,
Hmm.
push for trans inclusion. There's lots of
Mm.
workplace policies that are necessary to fully support
I love that
trans
term
people.
too, a thought leader, because I think a lot of people feel that if you're not in a manager position, or you're not in a position to make those decisions, and you don't have a lot of power, but a thought leader could be anybody.
That's
You know?
right.
Yeah.
That
So I,
that's
I like
that's
that. You
right.
are
So it's
influential. You know.
it is, and influence is an equivalent term we can use there. If you have an influence on the direction of your company, then speak out for
Yeah.
more trans inclusion. And then, as we talked about, talk to legislators. There's so many things we need, not just anti-hate, but better access to gender affirming care too.
Yeah.
Talk to media, push back on media when they publish terrible things. They're doing this because they think they'll get more readership or viewership or
Yeah.
clicks out of it. If
Yeah.
you tell them that no, they won't,
Yeah.
then they'll change their mind about those things. So there's so many things you can do.
That's right. Their stance. It's not that they have a lot of. The bottom line is money. They just
It
want.
it is.
They're just going to go wherever the money is. So
Yep. And if you show them that's unpopular and not something people want to see, then they'll go someplace else.
yeah, they don't care. They don't have any allegiance to anything really, or those people.
Nope.
Why don't we end on talking about, because we just celebrated last week actually, International Transgender Day of Visibility.
Yes, we did.
We did. So
On Friday, yes, March 31st.
yes, on March 31st. So, well, talk to us about it. I mean, how long has it been around? What does it mean for the community? How can people support, celebrate?
Sure. So it's been around since 2009. It was started by a trans woman in Michigan, Rachel Crendel. Um, and it was started because before that, we had one special day for the trans community, which is Trans Day of Remembrance, which is November 20th. But that was a very solemn, somber day. It was a day of mourning and grieving uh, for our losses during the year, because unfortunately, there are several hundred trans people killed around the world just for being trans and transphobic hate. And those are the only ones we know about. We know that
Right,
there are many more that are never identified.
right.
So we had this very somber day. Hello, someone's friend. Um, so we wanted a day more of joy and celebration, and that's what Trans Day of Visibility is. It's a day to celebrate being trans,
Yeah,
to
I love
celebrate
that.
our accomplishments and our role models, while still calling out the discrimination and hate we face,
Hmm.
and working to make it better. Um, so it's a great day. There were some great events in Toronto. If you could indulge me for a minute or two, I'll
Please,
also talk about gender affirming care in Ontario.
please do. Yeah, go.
So gender affirming care is a general term that covers any sort of medical or paramedical care that trans people might need to better align their bodies with who they are, either by masculinizing them or feminizing them. So that often involves taking hormones. Um, so trans women like me would take estrogen and progesterone to feminize our body. It may involve surgeries, even though not everyone gets surgeries. It also involves things like facial hair clearance via electrolysis or laser. Um, Now, in the last 20 years or so, the province started to cover the basics of gender affirming care, but there are many things that are still not covered, like facial hair clearance. And I can tell you that complete facial hair clearance takes years and
Okay.
thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
So you have to have a fair amount of resources to do it. And it makes such a huge difference.
I mean, it's on your face.
It's on your face.
It's on your face. Yeah.
Right? I mean, when I was first going out, before I had any facial hair clearance, I used to shave till I bled
Yeah.
to try and get rid of shadow. And that's not an uncommon experience. But none of that is covered. And you know, the expense problem is exacerbated because there's a lot of employment discrimination, employment problems around the trans community as well. One of the groups I was part of ran a survey of the trans community in Toronto in 2018, and we found that the average income was in the mid 20,000s. That's the average income. So there's a whole lot of people much lower than that.
Right.
And that's even with, you know, a whole stream of successful people who came out and kept their jobs and had great professional careers and were earning salaries that reflected that. So there are lots of people in Toronto who struggle and certainly can't afford to do laser and electrolysis and other procedures. And then, you know, only the most basic of gender affirming surgeries are covered by OHIP. So there are many things that aren't. And there's a whole long list of surgeries: breast augmentation, chest contouring, facial feminization surgery, that aren't covered. And WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, which is the worldwide medical body that sets the protocols and standards of care for gender affirming care, has, as of their last version last year, they have called all those procedures medically necessary.
Yeah.
So they should be covered by OHIP.
Yeah. Life-saving.
Absolutely life-saving.
Yeah. This is not cosmetic.
The rate of suicidality among trans people is high.
Yeah.
And not being able to obtain the care you need drives that, of course. So even the long wait times to get gender confirmation surgery in Ontario, the waiting list can be over 2 years.
Yeah. Imagine waiting 2 years. I mean, imagine like just every day.
It is. And it's life-changing, and it's a huge surgery. You have to plan for it. You're going to be off work for 2 months.
Yeah.
Like, you have to have plans in place on how you can do that. You're going to need people to come and help you and you know, bring food and cook food for you. You know, this is not, I'll take a couple of days off and then I'll go back to work.
Got a nose job. And, you know.
So that's so hard. So we need more resources to lower those wait times, even to get funding approval. So when you submit your application to get approved for these surgeries, it used to take a month, which is reasonable. Yeah. It now takes 8 to 9 months.
9 months of not knowing.
Indeed. The other major problem is just accessibility in terms of HRT, hormone replacement therapy. There's not anywhere near enough doctors who will administer that for trans people. Even in a big city like Toronto with a large trans community, it's common to wait 6 months or more to get a doctor.
Just to get the doctor.
Just to get the doctor, and then you got to get
an appointment.
Yep. You know. So it's hard. It's even worse for youth, where you would ideally want to go to a specialized youth gender clinic. Their waiting lists are over a year. And remember, you know, puberty is happening while your child is waiting.
So every day,
Yeah. So it's hard. And this is an issue we hope can be fixed, because the good news is any family physician or nurse practitioner in Ontario
Mhm.
can prescribe hormones. The protocols are very well known and very standard, but a lot of doctors don't want to do it. And I think there's some transphobia there. There's also just some, oh, I don't want to learn something new, even
Mhm.
though
Yeah.
education is available online from an agency called Rainbow Health Ontario.
Yeah.
You may be familiar with them. They're charged with supporting queer and trans health in Ontario. So they have education available the doctors can take online. They can do it from their office very easily. But not enough doctors are doing it. And that's why even in Toronto, accessibility is a real issue. But when you look at rural areas and the north,
Well, I was gonna
it's
say,
it's terrible. And that
yeah.
was made a lot worse in the last few months. You may know that the government changed the funding model for virtual clinics.
No.
What? Yes. So virtual clinics were able to charge um, online visits or telephone visits at the same rate that they could that a clinic could charge an in-person visit.
Okay.
The gov and the government was very much in favor of that during the pandemic
Sure.
because people couldn't go see their doctors.
Yeah.
Now, post-pandemic, the government has changed the funding model, so they get very little money for a virtual visit,
Oh, so
and
nobody was gonna want
therefore
to do that.
all the virtual clinics are shutting down.
Sure.
And you know, there was a big virtual clinic in Toronto that was supporting a lot of trans people, both in the city and throughout the province.
Hmm.
And now people are scrambling to find a new doctor. And if you're rural or in the north,
Yeah.
you know, if
Is
you're in
this
the
the
north,
Ford government?
yes, it is the provincial government, the Ford
Right.
government.
Of course.
Um, and so there's a lot of work being done to try and get them
Right.
to reverse that. And it's not just a problem for trans people. I mean, there's a lot of rural and northern people that were using virtual clinics just for their everyday
Right.
healthcare who are scrambling to find doctors because there's nowhere near enough
Yeah.
GPs in small towns and in the north. So
Well, like
that
you were
just made it
saying,
worse.
like we're not as bad as the US, but I mean, it's not utopia up here. There's still a lot of work to be done, and there's still governments that can come in and make it difficult.
It is. You know, we know this is part of the overall issue with healthcare in Ontario, that there's just not enough resources. There's not enough family doctors
Hmm.
in general,
Yeah.
especially again in remote areas.
Yeah.
Um, so we need to get more resources there, but we're hoping we can help and convince more doctors and nurse practitioners, you know, who are already practicing, to pick up HRT as something additional they can offer and to work with trans clients and patients to make things better. It's very easy to do. Rainbow Health also has a support phone call every week. So if you're new to it and have a question, you just
Hmm.
phone in the support call, and an experienced doctor will help answer your questions. So there's really no reason why we couldn't have many more doctors
I was
supporting
just going to use
the
those
trans
exact words.
community.
There's no reason. I don't. Yeah.
Yeah, the infrastructure is there to help
Hmm.
them and for them to get trained. And it's just a matter of them investing a little bit of time to help, you know, a very vulnerable community.
Yeah.
So that's going to
That's
be
important
one
information.
of
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
And you know, Toronto PFLAG has not done a lot of advocacy the last few years because things were looking good and we wanted to concentrate on our core mission around support and education. But we're getting into advocacy as the world changes.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
we're getting busy around anti-hate, and we're going to get busy around gender affirming care and try and make some things happen and
And you're
build
going to
some
be at the
partnerships.
forefront of that.
I hope to be. It's issues near and dear to my heart and
Yeah.
that affect me personally. I've got a great doctor. I'm pleased.
Thank God.
to say,
Yeah.
and we have a great relationship, and she's been wonderful to work with. And I went to Women's College Hospital for one of my surgeries in December, and Dr. Krakowski and his team are just brilliant and beautiful. And I was treated so well, but they need more resources.
Always more resources. We're blessed in Toronto to have such just on university, have all those, um, Mount Sinai and Princess Margaret, the Cancer
Yep,
Center, and the Sick Kids Hospital. And
yep.
so Toronto really has a
Oh, we
plethora
do.
of,
And as I said, women's college
yeah,
was great, and everybody I
yeah.
know who's gone to women's college has been pleased. I will tell you a funny story.
Well, yeah.
Um, so I was born at women's college. I was
Oh,
born 3 months. I was born
you're
three
kidding.
weeks. Nope, nope. I was born 3 weeks premature.
Oh, wow. That's a lot.
Um, so I was born by cesarean, and the
Okay.
doctor got me out and took a quick look between my legs, as I said it's a
Yeah.
boy, and rushed me off to the nursery to get looked after.
Yeah.
Um, so I told Dr. Krakowski that I'm giving him a chance to correct Women's College's original error.
Is he still around?
Oh, Dr. Krakowski was not my pediatrician; he was my surgeon.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay.
Yep.
I was like, wow. I thought it was the same guy. He did both. Can you
No,
imagine?
no, he would be a little old
A little
by
old.
then. And actually, in those days, women's college staff was largely women.
Oh, was it? Interesting.
Yes, it was a
Oh,
very early, very feminist
really?
organization.
That's amazing. I love that.
Having a back,
Huh.
I can't remember exactly when women's college started, but it was like early days of the 20th century. And that was a very different notion to have a whole hospital devoted to women's health.
Yeah. Well, even today, like when I see it, I'm like, oh, a women's hospital. Like it makes total sense, but it's still, yeah. The fact that it exists is not surprising, but just kind of necessary, but nice. But I know what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but they still have those feminist roots and tendency, but
That's
supporting
amazing.
all people, there's such a
Sure.
inclusive organization.
What a full circle moment for you.
It was really nice. I could have gone to the other clinic covered by OHIP is a clinic in Montreal, and I could have gone there and probably got my surgery done maybe a year sooner. But it was like,
Oh,
yeah,
really?
doing it in my hometown, a 15-minute drive
Yeah.
from where I
And having
was.
that full circle moment story to tell now.
Yeah,
That's
it
amazing.
it it felt like it was the right thing to do. It felt like karma to go back
To
there.
do it.
So, yep.
Steph, thank you so much for joining me today on my podcast.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it so much,
I
Patrick.
really, really appreciate it. It's been so lovely meeting you and getting to know you and hearing about your story. Thank you so
Oh,
much for
thank
sharing
you.
yourself with my listeners. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're so welcome. I love to help the world understand and tell
Yeah.
my story. So
Well, you are 100%. And we're going to put a bunch of links in the description below. So I'm going to make sure to get a bunch of resources and links from you, and we're going to put it in the description below
great,
for this video. Thank you so much,
great.
Steph.
You're most welcome, Patrick. Take care.
And I'm going to see the rest of you in the next episode of Queerly Us.